Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Fung, co-founder and CEO of Co-Create, enabling innovative brands to unlock the power of their community, fueled by gamified, truly self-owned rewards and their astonishingly simple community activation tools built on Web3. Tara, I'm so excited to not only chat with you about your founder journey, but this whole idea about community continues to grow. And it's really an organism that I think a lot of companies are paying way more attention to nowadays, especially as consumer behaviors are changing. Now we're capturing multiple consumers across different types of continents and countries and profiles, especially in Web3, that everything seems so, I think, fragmented. But I think a lot of the companies like yourself are focusing in on the important aspects of it. But before we get into all that good stuff, what were you doing before you started Co-Create?
Thank you for having me, Julian. I'm excited to be here. What I was doing right before Co-Create is I was the chief revenue officer of a venture-backed company that enabled individuals to invest retirement funds into alternative assets. So think non-publicly traded securities and investments, including venture capital and private real estate. And one of those asset classes was crypto. And that's what led me down the rabbit hole personally and introduced me to the exciting world of Web3.
Yeah. What about crypto and Web3 really was exciting to you? Obviously, there's so many aspects of it. I think a lot of people think crypto and tokens like Bitcoin, but others in the community think about infrastructure and layers that we can use it for pre-existing technology and new ways to use it. What in particular was exciting to you about crypto to then start a whole company around it?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of times when people hear Web3, they think crypto and they think Bitcoin and Ethereum. Yeah. And that was how I thought about it at first as well, is that this world of Web3, I didn't even like the term Web3. I thought it was a little bit high-nosed. And I was like, what's so different about this? This is just an investment, an asset class. And as an asset class, I can understand why, when I dug into it, why someone should have, call it 2 to 5% of their portfolio with exposure to this nascent asset class. It plays a role in a diversified portfolio. And so that made a lot of sense. And then there's the other side of it where people were saying, oh, this is distributed ledger technology, where you can just have a database that everyone can see at the same time. And so it's distributed across multiple machines as opposed to being captive to a single centralized entity. And I think neither of those things really capture what I think of as Web3. And what got me so excited about building in this space is that there are both tokens, which introduces value, right? If we think about Web 1 was read, Web 2 was read, write, and Web 3 is read, write, own. Tokens have introduced value to the internet in a way that is ownable. And distributed ledger technology introduced the ability for multiple people to see state at the same time. But smart contracts, which Ethereum really brought forward, allowed it not just to be about saying, okay, who owns what? It's also, let's introduce the idea of trustless transactions. Let's introduce this concept of smart contracts where we can pre-agree to certain terms and conditions that is visible to everyone. And we don't have to trust that an intermediary is in between us that's making these things happen, like a bookie. We can actually go and directly engage with another party without needing to trust them because we can just trust the blockchain. And so that was where I thought, oh, wow, this is truly groundbreaking technology. And it is superior for certain use cases. And I've got to figure more of it out. And I want to be building within it now.
Yeah. And so the whole trust component into blockchain, I think it's a hard concept for people to move forward from or move past. Thinking about not needing an intermediary or not needing a trusted individual to complete transactions or to facilitate certain types of contracts. But what goes into building that trust, being that you've worked with so many companies now that are looking to, I think trust is a huge component of it, obviously with FTX crumbling and that whole fiasco, but there are countless times where technology kind of, we lose a bit of trust in them, bad actors in the space. How do you build trust with something that you can't necessarily see or you can't necessarily interact with without giving yourself some exposure to it?
Yeah. And I think FTX, it was such a sad story because they have a centuries-old business model. There was nothing novel about their business model, which is they took money from people and they said they put it into they invested it into specific assets on behalf of those individuals. And they said that they were going to be a custodian, which custodian means safekeeping of those assets. But instead, what they did was they actually loaned them out to a hedge fund who lost all the money. And then when the people came looking for their funds, it wasn't there. And so the fact that crypto was the asset class on back end had nothing to do with FTX being just a fraudulent business. And I think it's so sad that that gets conflated, because the Web3 maxis will say this is the antithesis of Web3, because Web3 is all about you, not your keys, not your coin, right? Like you are in control of your own assets, which means you're not trusting some centralized party. You can just trust yourself. But I think what your question really gets at, Julian, is, well, how can someone trust themselves? How can someone feel confident to be able to understand, okay, if I'm connecting, if I have my own wallet and I'm self-custodying my own assets, I'm not using someone like FTX, I'm self-custodying it with my own wallet. How do I know when I connect my wallet to a smart contract? How do I know what it says? How do I know if it's good? How do I know they're not going to drain everything that's in my account? We see countless examples of really prominent people within Web3 who are very sophisticated, and they get duped and they make mistakes. And so I think this is indicative of we are very early. The technology is still nascent. Anytime there is a nascent technology, there are opportunities for people to both make a lot of money, but also lose a lot of money. And that's what we're seeing. Where I think this goes is I think that there are going to be more products and services that make it human readable for anyone to understand what a specific smart contract would do, what they are agreeing to when they connect their wallet, how to take better preventative actions to protect their assets. And so I'm seeing a lot of this coming. We have a lot of examples of plugins that make it so you can human read smart contracts, but it's still a long way to go.
Yeah. It's so fascinating just thinking about the amount of, I guess, investment into a community, obviously thinking about creating and how much that's going to foster not only people learning and being able to connect with the technology, but I think also on the flip side of that, the developer community who wants to, whether it's build applications on top of pre-existing technology within Web3, but also what that technology is going to do for the overall growth. And describe some of the communities that are being built through Co-Create, and what about community is so powerful for these companies that if they don't invest time into it, they lose out.
Yeah, I think the topic of trust is so important, because a lot of people don't feel like they can trust the counterparties, the institutions, the governments that they historically have done in the past, right? Like there's this narrative in our society that trust is broken. And so it's making people go closer to home, right? It's making people trust through word of mouth. I know someone in that community, or I'm part of this community, and this community, for me, that means that if we're both part of it, I feel some sort of kinship. There's some common value set or affiliation that brings us together. There's some common cultural norms that we share. And so I think that's why we're seeing community be so powerful, is that people have less trust that goes broader into larger groups. And so they want to stay, quote unquote, closer to something that they can know and feel more confident in. And what Web3 projects, NFT projects in particular, have highlighted is how powerful an engaged community can be. Like, love them or hate them, Bored Apes, when someone's a Bored Ape holder because they represent their identity through that Bored Ape. They go to parties because they own a Bored Ape. They see someone else who has a Bored Ape. If you see someone on the street, if you're a Bored Ape holder, or if you're an Azuki holder or a Doodle holder, whatever NFT community, if you're a part of one, and you see someone on the street that's wearing swag of the same NFT collection, you're like, oh man, I know you. And you don't, but you just feel this connection and this affiliation. And I think what established brands are looking at is they're looking at how these Web3 native projects have done such an incredible job of creating a group of people who feel like owners because they actually are. Going back to Web3 is about read, write, own, being able to have a form of ownership. And now these established brands are like, how can I tap into that? And they can't do it. They can't unlock the power of community just by sprinkling some Web3 fairy dust on top of what they're already doing. They actually have to say, you know what? I'm going to introduce a new level of ownership and voice and transparency to my audience. And I trust that by doing so, I will actually see more engagement, more advocacy, more word of mouth marketing on my behalf. And so that's what we're really focused on, is how can we take all of the complexity of Web3 that has been a hindrance to individuals feeling comfortable getting started, but also to brands feeling comfortable that they can move forward. And how can we take all that complexity, package it up, make it really simple, and introduce a way for brands and their audience to have a new type of relationship. One that's no longer a one-way conversation. It's no longer a two-way conversation. It's a multi-party conversation, because that's really what community is all about.
Yeah. Our big brands ready for that. And I asked that thinking about Starbucks implemented its own cryptocurrency, and Nike's obviously, all these large brands that we consider, even consumer brands, are focusing on ways to adopt Web3 in the community, whether it's through tokens or whether it's through deliverables that they can offer to their audience. Are they ready, or are they a little bit behind? Because I feel like a lot of the early Web3 builders kind of do this inherently as a part of their overall business model. What's the transition like?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We have been very specific as to what types of brands we think are our ideal brand partner. And we call them irreverent cult brands, because irreverent brands are brands that are not afraid to do things differently. And cult brands are ones that already have a really strong tie to the audience, which they consider a community. And for, let's call them most mass market brands, I don't think they actually want a different relationship with their audience. I think they just want their audience to spend more money with them, which I understand. I'm not criticizing, but that's not what we're trying to do or enable. We're trying to say, okay, for brands who actually think that there is more value in sharing and giving ownership to your audience, we're going to enable that. We're going to enable you to do collectibles, to introduce status as a digital asset, to introduce points. Instead of it being points in a closed database, they're points on an open database where you get to still define how those can be earned and redeemed, but it's a much more flexible, powerful, interoperable system, because these are points on a blockchain versus points in your own closed Web2 database. And there are a lot of brands that fall into this category. Like, I think Nike's approach to this is what I always point to. You pointed out Starbucks as well. Personally, I've really been impressed with Nike, because the approach they took is, first, they tried to understand, and they tried to understand what Web3 is about at an authentic level. They acquired one of the top NFT projects, Artifact, and they brought that knowledge in-house. They then set up their entire a consulting group in-house that's responsible for innovation. Then they launched this Nike.swoosh program, where someone can come, they can create their own version of a domain. You can get your own Nike domain name that's minted as an NFT that individual owns in a wallet that they own. And it's like, but it was Web3, it was true to Web3, the idea of ownership and personalization and transparency, but it was Web2 ease of use. That someone only needed an email address to sign up. And that's the exact type of experience that we enable any brand to do, where they can onboard their community with as little as an email address, but they're not giving up the concept of true ownership and tokenization of assets that someone can say, these are mine, and that means I get to decide what I want to do with them. And the brand can see the upside of being able to collaborate with other brands that are doing similar things, because these are assets on chain, as well as the advocacy and engagement that brings out from their community.
So many questions come to mind, but I guess the first one, just to give a little bit more structure to the conversation, is describe co-create. And when we think about communities, we think about congregating. And where do the users and companies, where do they congregate? And what are the common mechanics behind not only the conversations, but also the reward system that you're building? Describe those a little bit more in detail.
Yeah, so what co-create does is co-create serves brands and enables them to unlock the power of their community by introducing tokenized assets into their brand ecosystem. And so what this means is a brand like, we just announced our partnership with Boys Club, which is a Web3 native community today. Previously, we'd announced our partnership with Atari, which is, I would definitely say they're an irreverent cult brand. And we announced them a few months ago. And what these brands can do is they can come, they can set up their program with us where they can onboard their community to Web3 with as little as an email address, and we will spin up a wallet for the individual. We will mint their first tokens to that wallet, and we will enable the brand to set up campaigns where they can reward individuals for certain actions and allow them to utilize those rewards to gain access to goods, services, tickets, events, etc.
Yeah.
And so you can think of us as really the brand admin system that allows them to launch their loyalty points on chain, that allows them to launch collectibles that can be truly owned by their audience and mint NFTs easily, and can take their idea of status. So if you think about Delta Sky Miles, I have 100,000 miles and I'm also silver status. Like both of those can be assets on chain, and there are specific token types that support these different use cases. So we use fungible tokens for points, and we enable brands to mint their own fungible token. Like Delta could use their own Sky Miles token.
Wow.
We enable them to mint semi-fungible tokens as status, where my silver is the same as your silver, but it's different than gold. And something that is truly unique to Web3 that can't be done in a Web2 loyalty or engagement program is we enable brands to introduce the idea of collectibles, things that are uniquely yours, that are distinct assets that can represent identity, that can represent I was there when, I'm an OG, and introduces a lot of fun and gamification that isn't otherwise possible.
Yeah, there's so much shift, and countless companies are shifting to this model of community, but also education and really just fostering a lot of, I think a lot of brands before were thinking about just eyes, users, just, I guess, activity as a way to measure success. But now brands are shifting towards loyalty. How can I re-engage? How can I repurpose information or repurpose different tools to keep my community engaged? But you mentioned this concept earlier, which sparked an idea, which was how brands can cooperate or communicate, collaborate with other brands who are doing the same thing. How does that work in a Web3 community when there's different technology involved, when there's different communities that are very tribal in using that kind of terminology, very tribal in the essence that they have an identity, they have maybe a culture, they have rules that are maybe distinguishably different than another community? What are ways that they can cooperate and collaborate to benefit their users? Say if I was Nike wanting to work with Starbucks, for instance.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think what it gets at is, where is that community hub? And also how can brands easily engage and partner with other brands? And so speaking to like, where's the community hub? If we think about traditional Web2 product experiences, like say you go to, like, what's one of your favorite online product experiences? Do you have a brand that you really like?
Gosh, I'm an avid online shopper. So like endclothing.com, not to give anyone else where they can find cool clothes from Europe, but endclothing.com is a great experience for me.
Okay, so if you go to that website and you're engaging with their front-end application, that front-end application, when you log in, when you use your email address to log in, it's sending information back to the back end, to the data system, but only that specific website has access to that data. They're the only ones who have that back end. And that means that there's not another place where someone could say, you know what, I'm going to take this same information, the same data, and I'm just going to build a new product experience, a new application on top, because I think the onboarding kind of sucks, or I think I can do a better job of showcasing the curation and maybe curating the items for a specific user type. And so I'm not going to show shoes, even though shoes are part of the offering. I'm going to show, and I'm going to allow people to sort by color, because I think that's what really matters. And so what blockchain does is it gives everyone access to the same data for anything that's on a public blockchain. And it says, you know what, go wild. Build front-end experience to your heart's desire. And so what we're doing is we're helping brands get their community on-chain and get assets to those community members on-chain, including a point system for their brand, loyalty tiers that showcase the most active, engaged, contributory members, as well as collectibles that are one-off unique items that maybe they're earned, maybe they're bought and sold. And what this does is it enables the brand to say, I don't have to be the sole place where my community aggregates. Maybe I have a product experience that I build so that when someone comes and they log in and they quote unquote connect their wallet, I can show them specific experiences. But because these are assets on chain, someone in the community could also build a product experience and say, you know what? Every single person who has this specific shoe that's from this specific year, they can come connect your wallet. If you have the shoe, you get access to a community forum where you all can geek out about how much you love these shoes and how cool they are. And you can set meetups together, and you can token gate communities based on people's assets and what they own. And so I know I didn't address your question before of like, where does the community aggregate? And the great thing is they can aggregate where the brand in the ecosystem the brand is building, or they can migrate across the web, because now these are assets that are on an open database that people can build product experiences on top of. What that also does, going back to the three-pronged approach of points, tiers, and collectibles, we enable brands to launch all of these because we think they play a different role within a brand's ecosystem. Points really encourage specific actions. Do this, get points. Do that, get points. And you can then use these points and redeem them for goods, services, access, discounts, what have you. And then the tiers and collectibles, they serve a different purpose. Tiers are more that aspirational. You try to get to a tier because it unlocks new benefits for you. Or collectibles, you represent your identity by having this collectible, and you find other people who are similarly situated. The points is that interoperable brand piece that gets me really excited.
Yeah.
Most people think about blockchains and crypto or tokens as something that's an all or nothing. It's freely tradable, you don't control it at all, or it's soul bound, which is our word for, it's a terrible word within the Web3 ecosystem, but it means that the token, you can't move it at all. Whoever gets it, it just sits there in their wallet and it can never move. There are actually ways, these are just programmable assets. You can actually say, you know what? The points that I give out, here are the 5 ways they can be used. They can be used with me, but they could also be used at brand B or brand C. Oh, and maybe brand D, but only for this week. And I'm going to change it next week. And so we enable brands to launch their points as a token where that token contract is upgradable. Meaning the brand can say from one week to the next, my token can be used at these 10 companies or merchants or brands. Next week, only at these 5. And because these are tokens on a block, it means that there's no proprietary API between 2 closed data systems that needs to be built out to make this happen. It's just, okay, upgrade the contract, click, done.
Yeah. It's so fascinating to be able to think about the ways you can move within like you said, within the web, to be able to utilize what you own, your assets, into different companies or different programs. And it just kind of relinquishes the barrier to entry for a lot of different products or services, and really kind of creates like not a sense of ownership, but it's like a sense of identity through that ownership, which is amazing to see what that's going to be able to do in terms of the connection. Tell us a little bit about Co-Create, and tell us about the traction that you've seen. How many brands are you working with? What's exciting about the progress that you've seen so far? And what are you excited about in terms of the next year and so on that you're looking to work on?
Yeah, we've been really fortunate. I think that this vision of introducing a new relationship and a new degree of ownership for consumers and making them into community members for brands is something that I think is a massive opportunity and idea. And our investors did as well. We raised a $25 million seed round in April of last year, and we've been heads down building, working on, we write all of our own smart contracts that enable brands to issue these different types of tokens, these tiers, these points, these collectibles. And we've announced partnerships with Atari, with Boys Club. We have an e-commerce health and wellness platform that's coming online. One of the largest media brands in the world in the sports and entertainment space just launched their program with us, which we'll be sharing in the coming weeks. And so we're really excited about being able to primarily get more people to have more ownership by bringing them on chain and reducing the barrier to entry, making it so that you can just sign up with an email address. But also that cross-brand composability is the thing that we think will really bring power back to the brands versus intermediaries and platforms. I think so many brand leaders feel as though they are beholden to Google AdWords or Facebook, where they have to pay and fight against every other advertiser to get in front of a relevant audience. And they would much rather find values-aligned brands that are non-competitive and say, you know what, let's partner together. Like, we can cross-pollinate because all birds and Cometeer, a coffee and a shoe, those are non-competitive businesses. They're definitely targeting the same demographic. If they could partner together, there's so much value that can be unlocked for them as brands, but also for their audience.
Yeah.
And so, so future is bright. We're really excited about the brands that we're partnering with, and we're trying to be very specific and targeting brands who we think are in it for the right reasons, who actually want to introduce new level of ownership to their audience.
Yeah. I love what you said about everyone's kind of fighting for the same, almost ad space, but really two different brands who have different interests, not even non-competing businesses, are still fighting for that same exposure. It's really cool to think about a future where they're working in tandem with each other, not having some kind of launch or collection that involves a lot of upfront investment, but really small micro projects that become extremely intimate and extremely unique for the users, which I think everyone can agree that's what we all crave, right? We all crave that specific, unique experience based on something that we can congregate with a smaller community, which is awesome to see. And I guess thinking about just Web3 and where the current climate is, I guess in terms of the macro sense, what are some of the biggest challenges that Co-Create faces today?
I think it's being really specific around what we're doing and what we're not doing. The good news is that because we're making this more about like not the means, but actually the ends, we're trying to make this about let's unlock a new degree of consumer ownership that turns them into a community. And let's empower brands to do creative campaigns with other brands and truly make their consumers into advocates and evangelists and feel like owners. We're getting a lot of traction. And so we're getting asked to do more things than we can support. And so I'd say focus is probably the most important thing for us right now.
Yeah. If everything goes well, what's the long-term vision for Co-Create?
So we want to build the largest interoperable loyalty network connecting the most innovative brands and introducing a new degree of individual ownership to the brands that people engage with. For us, I think it truly is about like, this is more than just let's help companies make money. Companies need to make money in order to be sustainable businesses.
Yeah.
But I think that there's also a shifting power dynamic where individuals are realizing, you know what, my voice matters.
Yeah.
A lot of us, we are consumers in certain regards. We are influencers in others. We are advocates and evangelists in others. Like everyone is so multifaceted. And I think a lot of people who have voice and who have something that brands value, they're still struggling to be able to take advantage of that fully. And so what we're trying to do is introduce a new degree of ownership to communities while still recognizing that the brands need to benefit in order for this to be viable and sustainable. And so that's probably the future that I'm most excited about.
Yeah. I mean, you said so many things that I'm extremely passionate about, but I've also seen you about community of TikTok. It's been such a driving force between people having an area where they can gain I don't know, not unfiltered knowledge, but knowledge that essentially is a growing understanding of what something is doing, what are the mechanics behind it, and also what it means as a consumer, that we're all having some sort of attachment to it. So it's been super exciting to see that level of accountability set onto companies to not only provide an extremely full service and something that's valuable, but also something that is in line with the values of their consumer. We all want to make the right choices, but in the minuteness of life, it's difficult to know what those choices are, which I feel like Web3 kind of helps facilitate that. I always like to enter this next section. It's really exciting to me. I call it the founder FAQs, but I'm going to ask you a bunch of rapid fire questions, and I would love to see your answers and where we get. So first question is, what's particularly hard about your job?
That is constantly changing. I feel like what my job is changes as the company develops, as the team grows, as the market matures. And so I have to make sure that I'm staying up to date with like, what is my job as a CEO right now? And is it different than it was last week? Yeah.
What's one thing that you say weren't as good at early on as a founder that you find yourself better at today?
Ooh, I think early on, I see our investors as they invested in our ability to validate a hypothesis or invalidate it and then build a business based on what we learned.
Yeah.
And I love knowing what my goal is. And if I know what my goal is, I know how to get there. The ambiguity of like, okay, let's figure out where the largest opportunity is and let's validate or invalidate hypotheses. That was hard. And it felt really hard to lead a team through that and to say, hey, we got to be comfortable right here in this unknown. Because that's the stage we're in, and that's what And I feel like we're past that now. Like there's still a ton of unknown, of course, but we have a very clear direction. But that was the thing that was the hardest. And there were times where I just felt like I was failing as a leader.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of that, you talk about team and orienting your team around a particular mission, goal, value, or focus. Where do you go to find talented and strong team members, being that they're so valuable for the 0 to 1, if we call it, with businesses, not only for that, but also for the long-term success? Where do you go to find talented people as a founder?
Yeah, it's the most important thing. So my co-founder, who's our COO and general counsel, he is like the person who is so intentional about, okay, let's start. Our entire hiring process is so intentional. There's nothing that's an afterthought. We start by creating a mission and outcomes document of like, what is the mission for this role? What are the outcomes that they will have if they're successful? We use that to translate it into a job description. We then go to a comp database to say, okay, what's the 75th percentile for cash and equity for that person?
Yeah.
We then post this on all of the relevant jobs, many of which are crypto specific job sites, but then some that aren't. And we have several communities that we're a part of that we share individually. And then we go and we have a whole hiring process that validates someone against, okay, are they a fit for our values?
Yeah.
Are they a fit for the role? Are they a fit for the team? And so it's not necessarily just where can you find people, but what's the entire process to make sure that you can identify who the right people are. And I just think that the approach that he's introduced to the company has been incredibly successful. And I'm so happy with the team that we have.
I love that. The team aspect and the structure around it. I run a company where we connect developers from South America with U.S. companies, and a lot of the success is that structure of the interview process that makes a successful relationship, and it adds a level of not authority, but I guess almost comfort from the developer or from the talent point of view to feel that a company is at a level of maturity that they can feel confident in, which is often to see. If you were to have a magic wand, what is something that you wish your company could have now versus, say, whether you couldn't have it or whether you can have it in the near future? What's something that you wish you could have right now?
I just wish as soon as we could dream it, we could make it happen. Like the idea of product roadmaps are so important because it's like what's happening for a second, third. Yeah. But I just wish we could move faster because I'm so excited about what we're doing and I want it all done now.
Yeah. That seems like a common answer. What to go? Next question is, if you weren't working on this, what would you be working on?
That's a really good question because my career from the outside looking in makes no sense. I started out in like German automotive, and then I went into FinTech, but consumer lending and SaaS, and then I went into alternative investments, and now I'm in Web3, basically marketing technology, if you will. And so for me, it was always about I consider myself very opportunistic and that I just wanted to figure out how the world works. And so I do think I'd be working in Web3 no matter what because the world is changing and this is the new frontier. But no idea what it would be if it wasn't this. A year and a half ago, close to 2 years ago now, I put out into the world the next thing I did was going to be founding a company in the Web3 space. And this was the concept that I felt I could work on for 10 years. And if it failed, I would still feel good about it.
Yeah.
But if it wasn't this, it would be something else and it would be in Web3.
Yeah. I love that. What's one piece of advice you give to a founder building, I guess, early founder product? It doesn't even matter. What was one piece of advice that you found was helpful for you maybe early on in your career?
Yeah, so A16Z, they had a founder summit this past November, and it was incredible because it was about 200 people, and there were just these sessions with thought leaders and other builders, and I came away so invigorated. And one of the things that was said in the panel has really stuck with me, and it was Ben Horowitz, and he said, "It is better to be right than consistent." And as a founder at times, I feel like it's my job to be consistent and to say this way is north. Let's keep on. We're pointing north. We're going north, and not to create churn or disruptions. But actually, it's my job to say, you know what? We thought we needed to go north, but now we need to go east. Yeah. And so we're going east. And it is a hard right, everybody. Like, turn it now. And that I feel the weight of creating that disruption because I know people are working on things that then get, okay, well, maybe that didn't matter. That whole last week of work, it's gone. Doesn't matter anymore. I feel that as guilt, but I know that it's that it's better to be right than consistent has really encouraged me to make the tough calls when I needed to.
Wow. Yeah, it's super powerful. I love that. I love that. We might have to make that the tagline of the episode. Last question I always like to ask, just to kind of help with the audience, and obviously selfishly, I ask for my own inspiration, but whether it was early in your career or now, what books or people have influenced you the most?
I've always been the type of person that just enjoys reading fiction. I really love stories.
Yeah.
And it's such a silly answer because I don't think that it's a particularly insightful business book. Like The Hard Things About Hard Things is a great business book. Everyone should just keep it by their bedside and pick it up because it'll make you be like, oh, wow, this is hard, but it's supposed to be hard.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But a book that I read that I think had a lot more impact on me than I realized at the time was a book called To Race a Dream. And it was about a young girl who wanted to be a jockey in a time when women weren't jockeys. And so she had to dress up as a boy and try to become a horse jockey and racer. And I think I've always found myself in places where, first in German automotive and then in FinTech and then in crypto, where there just weren't as many women around. And I've never hid my identity.
Yeah.
But I think it was just the grit, maybe, of do what you need to do to be here and don't back down. And I reread that book probably half a dozen times growing up.
Yeah. It's so powerful, and it really shows. If I were to take away from that, it's like you said, it do what you need to do to be a part of the room, the conversation, and to really then press forward, whether it's your vision and the notoriety and validation comes along with the work. And I love that aspect, especially the honesty about startups too. You're getting constant feedback, and that feedback is extremely honest about one thing. It's about the work and the product, which is extremely equal in a lot of. I know we're at the close of the episode here, and I'm so excited to share this with the audience, not only your background, your experience, but also Web3 and how you view community and the importance of it, especially as these companies grow. But last little bit is, I would love to get your plugs. Where can we find you? Where can we be a part of, not only you as a founder, but the community of Co-Create and the different brands that you're bringing on board? What are your websites, your LinkedIns, your Twitters? Where can we engage as an audience and maybe even use the product?
Yeah. So you can find us on Twitter and online at Use Co-Create. So USE Co-Create. On Twitter, it's just Use Co-Create. Online, it's usecocreate.io. And me personally, you can follow me on Twitter. First name is Tara, Tara. And so I'm non-fungible Tara. And since my last name is Fung, I thought that was kind of cute. And then on LinkedIn, it's just Tara Fung.
Amazing. Tara, thank you so much for joining the show. I'm so excited for our audience to view this, and also maybe even to have a second conversation to maybe recap the growth we've seen from when we first chatted to where you are in the near future. But again, I hope you enjoyed yourself, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Julian. It was a real pleasure.